Imagine a time where if you wore all black, you were considered a Satanist. And you also could have gotten arrested for looking like you were a part of a cult that definitely left signs in the woods.
This is how gangs talk to each other, okay? But now this is how occultists talk to each other. This here is a psilocybin mushroom. So probably they had a psilocybin ritual.
And this actually brings me back to a time in the 1980s where your self-expression and your style was seen as a threat. But not only that, but a signal that you worshipped Satan, which leads us into the era of the Satanic Panic, American Christians' worst nightmare.
Listen to heavy metal music. The devil will make you kill your mom.
But I'm sure everyone's questioning, how did this all start? Well, many experts state that it started from Canada, from a very specific book called Michelle Remembers, which was published in the 1980 and written by a Canadian psychiatrist, Lawrence Pazder, and his former patient, Michelle Smith. But what exactly did the book entail in Michelle Remembers? Well, it was recovered memories from Michelle back in her childhood about satanic ritual abuse that was recovered by Dr. Pazder via 600 hours of intensive hypnosis, and considering this, you can see how this could be quite suggestive. Just like I'm suggesting you to like and comment under this video that I'm handsome. Okay, that's probably not gonna work. And also, mind you, she later married Dr. Pazder. And the one thing I'd like to add on is that they were both actually married at the time, so they both had to divorce or they cheated at some point. There's definitely some malpractice going on with his therapy. But if you thought media literacy was down now, back then it was way worse because this book influenced the masses into hysteria. But let's backpedal for a second here. I'm pretty sure you're quite interested in what was said in Michelle Remembers, and there's actually a 2023 review that kind of sums up what the book was about. Let's take a gander. Michelle Remembers gets a 1 star for the writing, just god-awful. But in reality, it gets 5 Baphomet pentagrams for originality and 5 more Baphomet pentagrams for hilarity. Here are some of the hysterical claims, or testimony, as Dr. Pazder likes to call them. The Satanists had a seemingly endless supply of dead babies and white kittens to use in their rituals. In one traumatic ceremony, the Satanists each had a white kitten which they tore apart with their teeth. Michelle was given away by her mother in an elaborate death/rebirth ceremony taking place in a cemetery. Her mother threw her into an open grave and an evil satanic nurse pulled her out and reenacted Michelle's birth, complete with blood, simulated childbirth, and being licked like a cat. More dead babies. This sounds like a sadist fan fiction, and it's written just like she was taking stuff out of her butt. Like literally picking her butt. Although Michelle Remembers was a big contributor to why the hysteria grew so fast, there were actually other contributors, like movies. 2 movies that come to mind are The Exorcist and The Omen, and there's also a third one that I just cannot remember. I'm sure you can leave it down in the comment section below. But these movies, if not, only pushed the hysteria and created agency for it to grow. And especially with the rise of VHS in the 80s that were growing and the disturbing content that was being consumed by parents, and not only parents, but also children. And since VHS couldn't really be policed by their parents, children pretty much were able to watch uncensored movies alone by themselves whenever they chose to. And I can specifically attest to this because when I was younger, my parents didn't supervise the TV, so I used to watch like CSI Miami or like the true crime sort of things at night alone while my parents were asleep, and God was I scarred. I couldn't sleep without my covers being above my ears because I was afraid that a serial killer was going to come into my room and chop my ear off. Imagine you being an adult already physically scared of Satanism, occults, and the supernatural, and your child comes at home like late at night or something and is like, hey dad, I saw like the devil, I saw Satanists. Or what if they told you that they saw their neighbor doing some occult stuff in the backyard? They weren't cooking barbecue, they were cooking babies. That would only instill more fear into the suspicion of your neighbor being occultists. And that happened quite often in America actually at this time. You couldn't trust your neighbors, you couldn't trust the daycares, you couldn't trust anybody. The only people you could trust was your family, and especially your children, even though they might give you the wrong testimony. And police trusted children as well, and that's how so many people got actually locked up for things that they never did. And it was all because children were a big part of pushing the hysteria further. But regardless of all that, VHS tapes didn't just stay at home. Churches and occult experts would actually distribute their own sensationalist propaganda tapes like Exposing the Satanic Underground, which were often played in community centers and churches to specifically educate parents of signs of cults.
I won't let her go!
Even talk shows like Geraldo and news segments on ABC 2020 use clips from horror films as B-roll footage while discussing alleged real-life cults. This imagery only reinforced fear in the public eye. And with the media amplification of the occult and Satanists being around America, parents started to fear heavy metal. And I'm sure you've probably heard of this before, where if you used a vinyl and you rewinded it, you could hear subliminal messages of Satan trying to recruit you.
Okay, I live with Satan, exactly. And then you'll hear there's power in Satan.
He will give you 666.
Yeah.
Like imagine like spinning a vinyl and then being like, wait, did you hear that? It said, you have nothing and no one. Yeah, I genuinely have no words. But considering all of these things that were occurring, what was going on with the L kids? Well, for them, this time was either mildly annoying or flat out frightening. And the reason why it was so frightening for all kids at this time was not only because of their parents, but because of the police officers. They were actually taught to look out for signs of dabblers. And those signs were that people who were supposedly satanic were listening to heavy metal, wearing black, playing Dungeons and Dragons, and just being a part of the LGBTQ+ community. So if any of that was you, then you would be flagged. Now this is the part where I get into the actual social issues and social pressures that were really immense, because you would be ostracized by church kids, which made up about 90-ish% of Americans in the 80s, and being non-Christian was considered unusual for that time. America operated within a very Christian framework. With that being said, the news, talk shows, and police were speaking to an audience already culturally prepared to believe it, which leads me to a massive case called the West Memphis 3.
And they prayed to Satan, and they prayed to the devil, and they had their satanic worship services out here, and they had all types of wild homosexual orgies, I've been told. Crazy things.
Fair trigger warning, just in case. I just want to make sure that you're aware. This can get quite gruesome. On May 5th, 1993, 3 8-year-old boys went bike riding in West Memphis, Arkansas. That evening, their parents reported them missing. The following day, police found the boys naked, hog-tied, in a drainage ditch in a forested area. The boys showed signs of being beaten, and Breyer's body showed signs of mutilation. It was a horrific, senseless murder. Since the crime scene was in the woods and the victims were nude and mutilated, locals and police immediately believed it was a sign of Satanism. Within days, the chief inspector publicly told community it was cult activity.
At a press conference, Inspector Gary Gitchell said the case against the accused teens is very strong.
Scale of 1 to 10, how solid do you think the case is?
11.
So before any real investigation happened, police pointed out a specific person in town. As one of the defense attorneys puts it, and I quote, "They were the unusual kids in town. They dressed in all black. They listened to heavy metal. They were goths before goths were fashionable, so they were easy targets." The 3 boys that were accused were Damian Eccles, 18, which was the main target, and the one police considered the ringleader.
They were under a lot of pressure. They had to find somebody to lay this off on before people started losing their jobs. The public was getting real upset, saying the cops were incompetent, couldn't do their job, so they had to do something fast. And we were like really the obvious choice because we stood out from everybody else.
Jason Baldwin, 16, was essentially guilty by association, and his main crime was being Eccles' best friend. And crazy enough, prosecutors actually used Jason's Metallica t-shirt as evidence of satanic activity in the trappings of the occult.
I can see where they might think I was in a cult because I wear Metallica t-shirts and stuff like that, but I'm not in nothing like that. I couldn't kill an animal or a person. I don't worship the devil or anything like that.
And last but not least, Jesse Miss Kelly, 17, had little real connection to the other two, but had an IQ of 72 and an education level of a 4th grader. The prosecution's case was built primarily on Miss Kelly's confession, which was riddled with inconsistencies and factual errors. Police interrogated him for roughly 12 hours, but recorded only a fraction of it. Miss Kelly retracted his confession within days, but it was nonetheless the foundation on which all 3 convictions rested. The actual evidence that was used for the prosecution included pictures of Metallica t-shirts worn by Jason Baldwin and books checked out by Damon Eccles at the public library. An expert in occult killings was brought in to testify that the murders had the trappings of occultism. The medical evidence did not support claims of sexual assault, and there was no physical evidence linking the 3 teenagers to the crime. With all the evidence being quite shaky and unreasonable, they were still sentenced. Damien Eccles was sentenced to death. Jesse Miss Kelly received life imprisonment plus 2 20-year sentences, and Jason Baldwin received life imprisonment. Eccles also spent years on death row, locked in his cell 23 hours a day for something he didn't do. But in 2007, DNA testing excluded all 3 men from all the crime scenes that evidence actually got to test. But despite all this, the legal system dragged their feet. In 2011, after 18 years in prison, all 3 entered an Alford plea, a rare legal maneuver allowing them to maintain their innocence while acknowledging prosecutors had enough evidence to convict. And they were set free, but with 18 years stolen from them. But with new DNA technology, they're actually going to be testing the evidence to make sure that they find the right perpetrator of this horrific crime. And this case marked the collective insanity that was the Panic. Self-expression and hobbies actually landed 3 young men into losing 18 years of their lives, which is absolutely unacceptable. And it's unfortunate to say that the West Memphis 3 is just another page from a giant book of people getting profiled just because of the way they express themselves and the hobbies they like for something they never even did. But I'd like to pay homage and respects to the people that had to go through horrible times like this, getting tossed in jail or absolutely getting profiled, made fun of, and bullied, and even ostracized to the point that they felt so lonely that they had nobody, and the only people they could go to was the community that they felt like they belonged to. Which leads me to the irony that the Panic actually backfired for a fashion suppressor. Because obviously during this time, wearing a band tee or wearing all black or looking goth or punk was a signal. And with parents and preachers being against the entire look, it essentially charged it to become a symbol of rebellion. And with the amount of suppression that the Panic was trying to do with fashion or even hobbies, it made it only more enticing for rebellious teens to latch themselves onto. And with all the suppression attempts, it cemented itself in culture. I mean, high fashion and streetwear constantly mined the alt look for art and profits. Religion tried to use fashion as a tool of moral control, because when 90% of the country identifies with a religion that has strong opinions about an appearance, those opinions don't just stay in church. And the total effect of the majority of religious culture was simply making its own aesthetic the default setting for American life.
I'm all for burning them at the stake, just like they did in Salem. I don't have a problem with it.
Now, I want to get a little parasocial here, but I grew up Christian. I mean, I remember there was a time where I got kicked out just because I dyed my hair. But religion has a chokehold on style and the way you're able to present yourself due to the fact of fear of looking gay and being gay. And I know this for a fact, considering that I also would go to church. I was a church-going church boy with my family. And my family, what I remember when I was younger was that if I wanted to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Or play Pokemon, it was considered satanic. If I wanted to wear all black, I was considered satanic, and I also was depressed. And that wouldn't allow me to branch out and find my own individuality within myself. I know for a fact, I will say this for a fact, I don't think I'm better than anybody. I don't think I dress more different than anyone else, and there are definitely people in the style genre that I'm in that dress better than me. I don't care, you know, whatever. I'm not different. I'm almost the same, practically the same. A black sheep is still a black sheep. It doesn't matter. But moving forward, when I was in the church, style didn't exist. Have you seen pastor drip before? It's awful. It's super awful. And during a time where wearing shoulder bags and stuff was really considered a horrible thing you could do, I was doing it. I wore a Supreme side bag, and my dad called me a slur, and when I'd wear it to church, it was almost like, whoa, this is mind-blowing. A guy wearing a side bag, this is freaking crazy. And as I continued to, develop some sort of style and even dress in streetwear, it was seen as abnormal and very utterly strange. And luckily for me, I wasn't necessarily ostracized from my own community that was the church. I was still very much welcomed. But for me, I was seen as the fashion kid, even though my style was really ass. But this is all to say that religion does have a very large grasp on individuals that are part of said thing. There's a dress code to things, and there always is going to be a uniform. And for me, unfortunately, the uniform was to dress like balls, to dress like ass and not have any individuality. I was supposed to dress like everyone else that was a part of the church. Being in a religious household definitely enticed me to find more of my own way and push myself out of that. And, just like many kids during the panic, it definitely was sort of a rebellious moment. But I do think that I appreciate the fact that I was able to kind of get out of the mold. I was restricted to a very set style and look, and I could not incorporate myself outside of that. But yeah, just a small story. But this leads me into the conversation of how did the Satanic Panic, besides it affect style and how people were dressing, how did it affect high fashion? Because there's actually a lot of interesting things that happened in high fashion. So let's talk about them. The influence of the panic made dark, alternative looks far more culturally and emotionally loaded. And if anyone can tell me who that is specifically.
My thing as a fashion designer, I say buy less clothes. Keep wearing things that you've really chosen that you love, and that is status. And it's not that you have to just keep consuming.
In 1983, Vivienne Westwood, Malcolm Lauren showed their final collaborative collection titled Witches. It referenced hip-hop and Haitian voodoo, which was at the height of the panic. Also, interestingly enough, they were inspired by Keith Haring's magical esoteric sign language, and it also marked the first time Haring's work would actually appear on the catwalk. Another person that comes to mind is Alexander McQueen, who also operated in the same aesthetic territory the Panic had tried to make radioactive. His Autumn Winter '96 show, Dante, was staged at a church in Spitalfields. But the interesting thing about this church was it was designed by Nicholas Hawesmore, a known Satanist. And this show featured models with antlers and horns sprouting from their heads. Looking at the runway, we gather dark symbolism, occult imagery, and transgressive femininity. McQueen, John Galliano, Vivienne Westwood, Mugler, and Jean-Paul Gaultier staged spectacular shows in the 90s with strong female characters imbued with power. The panic at this time was just one symptom of the same conservative, body-controlling, women-suppressing establishments that these designers were already pushing back against. So they were just responding to the same underlying conditions, and not necessarily the panic itself. Regardless, the panic didn't stop the dark art from flourishing. Arguably, the panic actually created audiences to become familiar and somewhat literate of what it sought to destroy. A designer that actually comes to mind in current times is probably Rick Owens. If you guys know about the Rick Owens controversy that happened not too long ago with the Converse collaboration, a lot of people came out about it.
Every day the world is becoming more godless and demonic.
But this was all to say that regardless of how people view fashion or how people view Rick Owens specifically, people don't necessarily recognize that this could be an artistic expression, or I guess it could also just be a part of one giant culprit that we can point at, which would be Satan himself. Do your own research on these designers, do your own research on what they believe in and what they stand for, and if their values and beliefs don't align with you, then whatever, just move on and just keep it pushing. I genuinely don't think that trying to create a cancellation or disturb them in their artwork is the best or fundamentally good, unless there's an actual valid critique within the schematic of what they created. Genuinely, I think that sometimes people make stuff that might be rage bait or engagement farming. If I definitely want to flatten their art, but this all to say, let designers design, let people create what they want to create. But rather than reacting to it, try engaging with it. Try and understand why it's even being made, why it's being created. And I think that will lead you down a better, more prosperous route that isn't filled with cortisol spikes and high cholesterol. That's just my opinion, though.
Teenagers of a congregation in Topeka, Kansas, destroyed thousands of dollars worth of records and tapes, which they felt contained the message of Satan.
And if anyone's wondering about what happened to my hair? I essentially asked for one fuck me up please, and that's what happened. So hopefully it'll grow back out, and it'll look a lot better in future videos. But for the time being, it will look like I have a jelly cut, Karen cut. I'm no longer John Lennon, fortunately. But yeah, that's kind of what happened. Hopefully you like the hair, I don't know. And if you'd like to get more socially peril, join me on Twitch. I Twitch stream every Thursdays and Sundays at an early time, hopefully. Blink it on screen, editor. Yeah, join me on there. Have a lot of fun time. Make sure to follow me on my Instagrams. There's a couple there. Make sure to check out my brand. I will be releasing some cool pants pretty soon. I'll see you guys later. And the next video will hopefully be about something interesting as well. Anyway, take care. See you later. Watch one of these videos at some point in time.